So thanks for joining us. Over the last couple of weeks, I've had a number of conversations with people that seem to indicate to me that the initial novelty of working from home is starting to wear off for a few people. Now, a lot of commentators are arguing about what's going to happen with the lockdown, but I think the one thing for certain is that no one really knows what's happening next. But the fact is we may be in this position for a while. So you've got people who ordinarily work from home but are facing a lot more challenges now because a lot of distractions around them, and others who aren't used to it at all and having to adapt every way that they work. And so what we wanted to do in this short video was to give you some ideas, some insights into how to make this work for you and for your team, maybe a little bit of re-energizing and recognition that, you know, we're all in the same boat and we can pull through this, and I hope that you find it useful. So I've pulled together a few of my friends and said, would you sort of come and join me on this video and give us some of your perspectives. So the people we've got on the call are Rob Gardner. Rob's both an executive director and a non-executive director, so he gets both sides of the pie, and one of his roles is that he's director of investments at St James's Place Wealth Management, which means that he's near the head of an organisation with thousands of people working in various roles. So I think there's a lot of people that are going to be very much impacted by working from home, including a lot of people whose role it is to go out and meet others on a regular basis, which is why I wanted Rob's perspective on this call. Tammy Owens is a friend of mine who's a director of Anywhere Agency, which is a marketing agency. The reason I wanted to invite Tammy on the call is that her whole philosophy is around remote working, and I would really call her an evangelist for remote working. So it'd be good to get her perspective on the times that we find ourselves in where it's not a choice, but we're actually forced into it. Someone else who's an evangelist for remote working is Tom Ball. Tom is the founder of Desk Lodge, which Tom founded a number of years ago, saying that while a lot of people wanted to work from home and a lot of companies wanted to encourage it, it wasn't always possible for people to work at home because of their circumstances. So he created a network of spaces where people could work near home. Now, obviously, that model's challenged in the current environment, but I felt that Tom could bring a lot to the party in terms of how you adapt, and it'd be interesting to find out how he can bring that expertise to play in the current situation where people have to be at home. Obviously, as well as the work elements, there is the health elements of working from home, both physical and mental, and that's why I invited the last two people on. The first one is Laura Ash. Laura is the Health and Wellness Director at Rock Solid, which is an executive personal training service, and Rock Solid provide a lot of support both in terms of physical exercise but also mindset, mental well-being, and Laura's got a personal interest in that, and nutrition as well. And then last but by no means least, Paul McGee. Paul's written a number of very well-known best-selling books. The best known perhaps is Sumo, Shut Up, Move On, wonderful title, and his very timely book, How Not to Worry, is I think still free on Kindle at the moment, Paul. But Paul, very much an expert in the mental sides of how you cope with challenges and how you create a positive mindset. So let's start with a question for everyone and just try and understand, you know, how has this impacted you? Everyone's in the same boat. Some of us have home offices already, for others it's new. What have you particularly noticed has been different over the last few weeks? Let's start with Tom.
So work's obviously been hit quite fast. We've got 4 buildings, and on a busy day they'd normally have 1,000 people in them working away and enjoying the benefits of being near each other. Obviously at the moment they're still open, but we generally have 1 or 2 people there. So it's a massive change on that side, and seeing that everyone's been hit very hard and having to change their habits. Personally, I'm used to working from home. I got into this because I felt I was working at home and found it quite lonely. So I'm quite experienced at being from home. But the honest answer is I'm finding much higher mood swings than normal. I'm having really good days and really, really bad days. I'm in a flat without a garden, and so I'm missing that outdoor space. And I'm sure I think there'll be a difference of opinion. And yeah, I had experienced drinking too much alcohol in the first 2 weeks, as a mix of medication and getting through it. And I've switched that to running far too much. So I've been trying to let myself go on that journey.
Good. Well, I think Laura will appreciate that shift. So, Laura, what have you spotted over the last few weeks? You need to unmute yourself, Laura. Sorry.
There was me thinking you were going to do it for me, Andy. For us, we've been working from home for about 7 years now, to be honest with you. So the only thing that we have noticed is that we haven't got the PT clients coming in. We kind of just have a small handful of people coming in. And that is the only thing that we've noticed. The other thing is we have seen a drop in people taking up programs because nobody knows what their money situation is going to be. So that's one thing that has impacted us. But other than that, not much. As Tom said, moods have been affected, but that's mainly because we're in uncertain times. So that is going to cause heightened anxiety and all that sort of stuff, which Paul's going to, tell us all about, I'm sure. By, we get off this, we'll all be chilled out. But yeah, so that's the only thing really that's affected us.
I think that point about the shift in mood is absolutely key, and there is the anxiety, but I think also Tom's point about he initially started the business because he felt lonely working at home, and then obviously I think this is one of the things when we're confined. Obviously you work with your husband Barry, and so you've got that person to bounce off, and I wonder if that may well be a positive for you guys.
Well, he's not in the gym as much, and Barry's quite hyperactive, so he's in the office a lot more. So, yeah, it's been interesting. He's peering at me from across the screen. So, yeah.
Okay, so Rob, you're more used to working in an office with people around. What sort of changes have you seen? Well, let's start personally. I'm going to come on later and ask you about organisationally, but how about for you as an individual?
Yeah, so look, I live in London, so I suppose my wife and I probably started kind of self-locking down probably a week before everyone else. I certainly didn't feel very happy commuting into Waterloo every day. So I have two daughters. One's asleep beneath me in the sort of floor below, and literally the reason I think why we had to start at 2:30 was I was on homeschooling duty from 12:30 to 2:30, so I've come straight from maths to this webinar. And I think that's the hardest thing is, my wife works, I work, we're not professional teachers, we're parents, and we've got to do all of that. School starts back again this week. When school ended, it was in the kind of we don't really know what's happening. Schools have been busy all over the kind of school holidays figuring out how they're going to do it. Is it on Zoom? Is it on Microsoft Teams? So look, the kind of the family show must go on, as must work, and yeah, look, I think it's different. It's definitely not lonely. And this morning, actually, I was on a Teams webinar call with my colleagues, and my daughter pushed this underneath the door. It was just a little drawing, but in it, she just said, "I love you. I hope you're having a nice time." So she just pushed that under my door while I was doing like a Teams call with 200 people in my team, and that made my day. But if last night I'd recorded what my younger daughter was doing, it can get very, very stressful. So the swings in mood are probably driven by the swings in mood of all of us. In terms of trying to stay fit and healthy, my wife and I have started playing backgammon again, which we haven't played in years. And yesterday I made a sort of makeshift badminton net in the garden, so we can sort of play badminton this week in the sun in the evenings as something to do to entertain ourselves.
Excellent. I mean, obviously, the homeschooling is a whole different element, and we're going to come on to the different distractions, such as having kids in the house and so on. I must say, you do yourself down a little bit saying you're not a teacher, because I think you, as someone who's written books for kids on how to learn about money and gives talks in schools, I think you've probably got a bit of experience more than a lot of people out there, which will help. But obviously, it's a big jump from that to homeschooling. Paul, you've been doing some writing for schools as well, although your kids are a little bit older, aren't they, and moved out. So how have you been adapting?
Well, it was strange. Just before the lockdown, I did actually become ill with the virus. So
Yeah.
the first 2 weeks, it just totally knocked my system completely. So it was a bit of a slow start to adjustment because I couldn't literally do anything. But yeah, I've got a book that's coming out later this year, which is aimed at teenagers. It has to be submitted in the next 10 days. So it's been good to be working on that. But the majority of my work is about speaking at conferences and team events. So things got cancelled, and it seems September seems to be a popular month where things will hopefully be starting again. But it gives me time for reading and research, and I'm trying to work on, I don't want to learn new things. I've decided to take a focus of get better at what I'm already good at. So I've actually been on doing a presentation and communication masterclass. And although I've written what will be now 12 books this year, I'm going to do a writing skills course as well. So, and we've got 6 of us at home. All of us are, so in some respects, I don't have to worry about social connection. I've got plenty of it, and some could say too much of it. But we're doing okay at the moment after what was a pretty shaky start when I got the illness.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think you're one of the only people I know that's personally been affected in that way by coronavirus, and it really knocked you for 6, didn't it? So that recovery time for you would have been key for the first few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm still not being officially tested, but as my son, who's living with us at the moment, is a doctor, he was able to took my temperature and assess all the other symptoms and said, this is what you've got. And but the thing that was always reassuring was it never seemed to get to my lungs. So my breathing wasn't affected. But talk about fatigue and fever and being delirious at night. It was an interesting experience. But I've made a full recovery. The mojo's back, and I'm pressing on doing all sorts at the moment.
Great to hear. And Tammy, you've recently, fairly recently moved from agency life where you would have been in an office to working from home anyway. So has it been just a smooth transition for you, or have you really noticed big differences?
So you think of all the people here, perhaps I'd be the one that's happy having founded an agency entirely on the concept of remote working and being able to work from anywhere. Well, apart from the sad circumstances, not happy, although can see the positives. So, I mean, as an agency, we went from, as a concept, there was one other agency that I could find in the research that I've done to date that was purely positioning itself as a remote first agency. Now, suddenly that's not a unique selling point. The whole world is remote working. So that's great in terms of one of the motivations of why I set up the business. But to be clear, I don't think that this is remote working. This is home working, and it's home working on lockdown. And with that comes all sorts of mental and physical and social challenges. So, as a business, the clients we'd initially working with, a lot of them were travel and leisure. So they've had some disruption and challenges. As an individual, I'm not somebody that responds well at looking at the same 4 walls and a desk every day. I need variety. So finding my own motivation, I've had to find my own sort of like new rhythm. But on the positives side of it, I can see lots of conversations now opening up of people diversifying, beginning to innovate, businesses picking up in particular areas. And what I love about all this is people are really open to ideas. So I'm having lots of great conversations with people perhaps I wouldn't have done that are looking to try and see things differently.
That's good. It's something that I talked about in a different panel video like this one, where people actually, on the whole, are increasingly more accessible than they would normally be, because there's no commute between meetings. The number of meetings may well have gone down for a lot of people. So people, can be there for conversation, and that's good both from a business perspective and reaching out to people, but also from a mental health perspective. As well. And I think what you've said about needing variety resonates with what Tom said about the loneliness of working from home. And I think that will be affecting a lot of people on who are watching the video. So in those introductions, you've all touched on some of the points that I want to come on to cover. I want to focus most of our time talking about how individuals can adapt and make the best of the circumstances that we face. But I want to start by looking from a management and organisational perspective, and this is something for you, Rob. What are the challenges to a big organisation like SJP of suddenly having a lot of people working from home, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, people who are used to not just working from an office, but having to go out and about, and whose job, their function relies on meeting people and talking to people. How are you finding people are adapting at the moment, and how are you coping with it?
Well, look, I'd say overall adapting extremely well. I think the kind of resilience of our employees and our partners is great. Just to kind of put some context around that, SJP is this partnership model. So we have 4,000 partners, financial advisors. They're all self-employed, and they kind of group into 2,500 businesses spread across the UK. So from sole trader to our largest practice is over 100 people. We have 22 offices across the UK. And then SJP, the company, employs over 2,000 people. So we've got a community of well over 10,000. And I personally manage about 200 directly. So I think week one was all about how do we kind of close down the offices? How do we make sure that people have laptops and are set up at home? Actually, this morning I just had a sort of Q&A with my team. I'd posted something up. And one was kind of normalizing it. So I did an 8-minute video actually to the whole community of 10,000 people, shot right here, just talked about the challenges I faced, my unhealthy obsession with ginger nut biscuits and chocolate digestives, which I never even used to eat. And then luckily my wife kind of gave me that look, which is like, this has got to end because it's not going to end well for you. I running an investment business, my team is responsible for over 100 billion pounds. The financial markets have been haywire. People who've got pensions or ISAs have understandably been put out by this. So my challenge is that, me and my team probably working 16, 18 hours a day. So it wasn't boredom. And we were kind of running on an adrenaline for the first week. And that was great. Everyone was on a high for the first week. And then obviously you can't run on adrenaline forever. So there was a bit of a crash. And what we've been trying to do is normalize routines, share sort of best practice. So I try and do my Calm meditation every morning. The Calm app. I do my Pilates. I've managed to find someone who gives me sort of Pilates lessons each morning on FaceTime. And encouraging. The reason I was kind of sharing my stuff was to say, look, it's okay. We're going to have to work flexibly. Some of you are homeschooling. Some of you are, living on your own. Some of you are living with parents in your house. An organization that's large, obviously, a lot of employees and partners have lost loved ones. And unfortunately, we've started to lose people in our community. Statistically, that's going to happen with 15,000 deaths. So what are the consequences of bereavement? How do you deal with kind of, people getting it, like Paul got it earlier, and, knock-ons to the workforce. But the key thing, I suppose, is on the one hand, in the adoption of technology like Zoom and Microsoft Teams has been great. And actually my kind of consultancy team have been more productive than ever. They've had more client meetings, more partner meetings, whereas normally they'd be commuting. I can't remember if it was Tom or Tammy who was saying. So actually quite a few people are happier because they're spending more time with their family, less time commuting, and still feel like they're having an impact on that. I suppose my concern is it's a sort of marathon, not a sprint. And so, we're still only 4 weeks in. Hopefully this unwinds in 3 weeks, but no one knows what unwind looks like. And the only other really interesting social experiment is that it kind of takes 21 days to form a habit, good or bad. And I liked what Paul said about rather than learning new skills, but sort of getting better at something else. And I think, so for me, my habit is to improve my flexibility because it's really bad. And so that's my goal. And I'm absolutely mindful of not setting up bad habits. So I only drink on the weekend. So I'm quite strict on that now. And thinking about what new habits we can learn. I've kicked off a competition for my team, which is what new habits do we want to keep when we come out of all of this? So I'll pause there, Andy.
Well, I think that one of the things that comes out of that for me is that as a manager of a team, it really brings into much sharper focus a lot of the different roles that a manager needs to perform. So, as an outsider, you might think, well, they've got to deal with how the business is going to adapt. But of course, looking after each of your staff in quite distressing times for a number of them, when they haven't got the community around them, it becomes much more important than ever. And making sure everyone feels engaged and cared for. That sort of parochial is the wrong word, but that parental almost role that a manager plays within the community becomes much more important for you as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, in a school context, you'd call that pastoral care, but
Pastoral, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
We have this thing called Great Place to Work, and we have a team yoga class on Friday. We have a virtual beer. We have 2 team quiz nights. So trying to kind of keep that cadence of stuff you might do as a community. I mean, a lot of people work because of community, right? So I love what Tammy said about remote working rather than we're being forced to work at home. I agree, it's not quite the same. And Tom's business idea sounds great, because I think what people are liking is they're not having to commute. So I get to exercise, I get to walk my dog, I get to spend more time with my family. So tick. They like the fact that they're not damaging the environment as much, not getting in a car or driving or all the rest. So tick. But being forced to stay within your house, and obviously that's more challenging for people who are stuck in a small flat versus in a house with a garden. And then also I've got people as young as 18 all the way through to people in their sort of early 60s, and I can relate to people like me with kids at primary school, but it's quite hard. How do you relate to an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old who's at home on their own, living in Bristol or living in London? It's interesting.
So Tom, you've been running Desk Lodge for a number of years now, so you will have had people who are remote working away from their team at your various centres. What sort of approaches have you seen them use to stay plugged in, particularly where they're the remote one and the rest of the team is together? What sort of ideas have you seen that could really come into focus now?
It's that, as you imagine, a lot of conversations with different teams trying to understand what they're doing, and we're quite lucky that as a co-working centre we attract companies that are ahead of the curve on this. I think I've got there's three basics that most people will know, and 3 specific ideas that I've seen that are being used. The basics are things like having structured one-to-ones and team meetings. Most people will have ticked that box. There's thinking about people's workspace, the fact that some people are sat in their bedroom and it's not easy to work on a bed for 8 hours a day, which I know we're going to come on to. And obviously good management, about actually setting clear objectives. You can't wing it if someone's remote. You need to actually kind of plan ahead and give them some rope. The 3 specific things that not everyone seems to be doing is a daily 5-minute huddle. So it's a different thing to a team meeting. It's just a very short, sharp, round the 6 of us. What's the one thing you want to get done today? What's standing in your way? Right, great, next. And you just start the day kind of on the same page. There's another habit. If you're not careful, a video meeting has become this big, planned, onerous, hour-long thing. And there's times like, Andy, I just need to pick your brains. Let's jump on and they've got a name for it. Some people like a 3-minute Zoom call. I don't need to ask how your day is. I don't understand how the kids are. We'll do that later. I just need, exactly the same as you'd walk over to somebody's desk if you're in the same room, or you pick up the phone, to take that habit and do it digitally. And the third one is, which Rob touched on, is about mental health. And just as a whole gamut of things that people need from an organisation. Some people, like Paul, with a house full of people, some people are sat alone. So putting in place different things. So examples around that are having random one-to-ones. In a big organisation, you might randomly pair people together, and 2 people that have never naturally speak to each other bump into each other over the coffee machine on a phone call. Doing drinks or bingo or things like that, or just having lunch where just for half an hour you're all sat in a Zoom call. You don't talk to each other. You're just sharing a bit of time, just not being alone. And the last thought on that was just to think of people who are furloughed. Sat at home. It's not just a month sat at home. It's quite an uncertain time for people. They the sort of talent that you aspire to attract aren't the sort of people that like sitting at home bored for weeks at a time.
You know, I've got a neighbour who's furloughed, and he's as glum as can be. You know, he really feels useless, and you know, and it's a struggle financially. You know, being on 80% of his salary. So yes, that's a very challenging scenario for a lot of people. Okay, I want to go back to something that was touched on earlier. I put a call out through my newsletter and social media for any questions in advance, and one of them came from Michael Clark, who replied to my newsletter, and he said, while we're set up to successfully run a business from our homes, I do miss that it's now a month since I last walked over London Bridge, met people for the first time, or old acquaintances over coffee, beer or wine. I don't know if that's all three together or separate, and walked around the streets of London and generally had fun working. I think this goes very much to what Tammy was talking about earlier. He said, I guess you could call this working from home fatigue, and with no sign of ending anytime soon, how can we best manage this? So it's that, I would put that down to a loss of connection. I don't think Zoom calls replace genuine human connection, and I think that's what Michael's talking about, what Michael's missing. So Tammy, you talked about this in your sort of introduction. How can you manage that, and how are you managing it at the moment?
I think there were sort of two parts to that. There was the social connection, and also he mentioned walking over London Bridge, which is the variety thing as well. So for me, I guess there's two parts to it. There's finding your rhythm and a routine that gives you some sort of like milestones to hang on to, basically, but also staying creative as well. So some things that are interesting about this time perhaps is we might find different routines. We're forced into different routines, and employers should be more supportive for needing different routines. Let's say you have children, etc. So you might find that you're really active in the morning and less so in the evening, and you can ride those waves a little bit more. And I find that quite interesting, just learning about myself as well. In terms of sort of like getting creative, I think we need to use home working for what it's really good for. So we can still have fun while we work. We're all right near our kitchens now. We can make something for lunch we've never made before, or have a cup of tea and call a colleague that we wouldn't have done before. So thinking about how to sort of mix it up, basically. In terms of connections, I think it's really interesting. We're all evolving a new way of language almost. So, you know, if you look at the evolution of the remote worker at the beginning, none of us could log on to a Zoom call. We've all managed it today. Now, Andy, you've got a great branded background there. You know, the world will move towards sort of like virtual backgrounds and AR. I've actually found some of the you know, the fun AR tools actually great in personal conversations, in terms of, you know, sometimes they've been quite sort of like serious, and it's quite difficult to stay positivity. But when somebody like flicks on, you know, the devil horns or the tiger, it's difficult not to like lighten the load a little bit. So it'd be really interesting, just as emoticons have kind of like come into our language, you know, we're all going to have some kind of like augmented reality peacock skills basically in the future, and that's going to be part of communicating and thinking.
It may be. I'm not sure how this recording is going to come out. Tom, your Tiger King background might not have shown, so just flick it on again and say hello so that everyone can see your Tiger King background. So you need to talk to us now so that you go on camera.
There you go. So there's so just I've been experimenting with different backgrounds. We've got virtual desk lodge backgrounds, so members can pretend to be in our spaces even though they can't be. But this is one that I found. And I do think there's something quite intimate and quite human about. I think I feel closer to Paul for seeing you in your living room. There's some in your office, rather. There's something quite special about seeing people in their natural environments that's different to just seeing people in the background. So I think I quite like both.
Yeah, I've been sent through virtual backgrounds from the private members club, the hospital club that I'm a member of, and I've been using that a lot. And a lot of people have been commenting on it. But if my green screen wasn't here, you'd get my bookcase, and now everyone's got a bookcase behind them, Tom. Tammy, you talked about using working from home in the best way possible, and as well as the sort of different activities you talked about, one of the things that I've been doing is the type of intense focused work that I struggle with when I've got a diary packed with meetings throughout the week. So I wrote an ebook in 2 weeks. It's 25,000 words. So I worked out it equates to 500,000 words a year rate. And so that was written in 2 weeks. That's coming out at the end of May. I'm starting a podcast series. And those are the sorts of things that my normal day to day, I just struggle with to try and fit them in between the commuting and the meetings and everything else happening. So it may well be one way to re-energize and to deal with the fatigue that Michael referenced, is to really throw yourself into a project that you wouldn't have found the time to do otherwise, particularly if the demands of what we'd call your 9 to 5 are maybe slightly different to normal. Paul, you specialize in mindset and how to manage your emotions. So, how would you deal with working from home fatigue?
I think one of the things that's become very, very clear through this whole crisis is humans need humans. And to acknowledge that and to acknowledge your vulnerability at times. And when I say fortunately, a lot of people reached out to me when I was ill, but they did it via social media and texting and one thing or another, which, although it was exhausting to reply to, I appreciated it. But there's no doubt about it. Doing a Zoom call or picking up the phone and hearing somebody's voice, I think is still different to just simply, for me personally, it might not be for everybody, than simply being on a WhatsApp group and texting and messaging that way. So although we might not be able to see people physically in their presence, going back to, I think, maybe Tom's point about just seeing people face to face, but also I do think that whole thing about speaking on the telephone has been an important thing for me. So Michael's point about how do we manage this is, first of all, just to acknowledge, yeah, it is difficult. You're missing that human connection. You're missing the variety. And some people are aware that in my sumo book, I talk about this thing called hippo time. Hippo time is okay. What hippos do in mud, they wallow. And at times we just need to give ourselves permission to say, I need a little bit of wallow time here. I will be having some ups and downs. And rather than that's, get a grip of myself, just acknowledge it is okay to sometimes not always feel okay. But having said that, if we're not careful, we keep focusing on what we're missing. And I think it's really important to manage your mindset. Think, okay, what am I thankful for? What am I grateful for right now? And what actually has this crisis given me an opportunity to do? And it's interesting listening to everybody who's contributed so far. They've actually, we'll say this quietly, but there's been some benefits as well as some real challenges to what we're going through. And we've got a choice. Do we keep on magnifying the challenges and what we've lost? Or do we also focus on some of the positives and the opportunities and what actually we might have gained as well?
I want to stay on that theme of your mindset and effectively the mental health as well as the physical health that we've got to look at. There was a small piece in the week that I read yesterday, and I just want to read it back. And then, Paul, I'll come back to you in a second for this, and I'd like Laura's take on this as well. So it says, people aren't sleeping well in lockdown, leading to a spike in back pain. Almost 2/3 of respondents to the Institute for Employment Studies survey said that anxiety was keeping them awake at night, while half reported new neck, shoulder or back pain. The latter is thought to be a side effect of the shift to home working. Millions of people who once sat at office desks are now hunched over laptops. I do think there are going to be questions over whether people can sustain prolonged laptop working. The IES's Stephen Bevan told The Guardian. And though there are hordes of joggers in the parks, the population as a whole seems to be living rather less healthily. 60% of respondents said they're getting less exercise than before lockdown. A third say they're eating less healthily, and 20%, including Tom Ball, say they're drinking more alcohol, or Tom Ball did. Laura, how do we become conscious of this? How do we manage these specific posture related issues, and how do we make sure we get the exercise that we need during this time?
It's really interesting, everything you said there. I think because everybody is kind of treating it like it's a weekend. Every day is a weekend. And we talked about connection, and Paul, you will probably know about this as well. It's like, we look for connection in lots of ways, as in with other people, okay? But when we haven't got that, where do we get that connection? Through alcohol, through food, through gambling, whatever it is that takes your distraction away. And I think that's one of the areas that we've got to be really careful of is looking at what we're using now to have connection with, if that makes sense. I think when it comes to recognizing this, it's the 3 A's. It's acknowledging it, okay, it's accepting it, and then it's adapting it. So you've got to acknowledge what's going on. That's the first step. If you're in denial, then you're not going to get anywhere. The next thing is you've got to accept it. Okay, hands up, I'm eating, I'm drinking more, whatever it is, like you did, Tom. It's a tough thing to own up to, because you're like, what am I doing? But just these are unprecedented times. We've just got to do that. And then it's about adapting. So it's making those changes. The big thing for me is having boundaries and morning and evening routines. I feel that people are not sleeping because they haven't got evening routines. They may be going straight from laptop and then going to bed, and they're not having that routine. They're not having that time to just wind down. They're staying up late watching the Tiger King or whatever it is that they're watching on TV because they're treating it like a weekend. Oh, I can get up tomorrow. I don't need to commute. I can just stay in my pajamas. And there's that air of standards being dropped, if that makes sense. I know for me, when I was medically retired, I went from working a 5-day job in the police to literally nothing, no communication, nobody around, like a lot of you guys are facing now. And the one thing that I put in place was those boundaries, morning and evening routines. You said about how can people stop being hunched over a laptop. So I've worked on a laptop for 7 years, and something as simple as a spacer that lifts it up can really help. You put it on your dining room table or whatever your safe space is to work, put a riser on that, and then you can have it as a normal screen. But the best thing is going to be getting out, doing some exercise and moving your body, because we're stagnant. We're sat for periods of time, and also we're overcompensating a lot of the time. We're thinking we need to do more work because we're at home, when in actual fact, if you just do what you need to do, like Tom said, he has team meetings with people. What have we got to get done today? Focus on that one thing, because we're experiencing all the emotions of the rainbow at the moment, so it is very much right. What is it we need to do today and get that done, and not overcompensating.
I think this point about structuring the day is absolutely key. I remember a mutual friend of mine and Tammy saying to me a few months ago before this that she couldn't envisage working from home and going straight from getting ready to going into the office. She would have to walk somewhere. And it's little things like that. I will vary my day between sitting at my laptop, sitting on an office chair, sitting on a stability ball, standing and just boosting my laptop. So I convert almost into a standing desk so that my body doesn't sit in the same position the whole time. Because I know that before this, if I had more than 2 or 3 days working from home in a week, my back would suffer. I'd notice a difference.
But the thing is, everybody's capable of putting a new routine in place. Just look when Christmas happens, right? Christmas happens, all routines go out, but then, we get back to it afterwards and we find our routine. And if you kind of look at it as an adjustment period, just about finding your routine. I did a radio interview last week, and the lady there was talking about routines. We've always had a routine in the morning. So why are we deviating from that? It's just that we're not commuting now. So if we go back to that, we get up at the same time that we get up, and then we have the weekends like we normally have. If you normally went to the gym in the evening, well, maybe you do a workout in the evening. If we can try and stick to as normality as possible, but still adapting, it's going to help us live healthier, lives mentally and physically, I think.
And I guess, Paul, what you were saying earlier about turning your mind to the positives rather than the negatives, what it gives us rather than what it takes away, that's something you can make sure you build into your routine as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and it's really been well explained by Laura, is I use a formula. I got it from Jack Canfield when I listened to an audio program we did in the early 90s. E plus R equals O. It's the event plus our response that influences the outcome. And I think the danger of having that article from the week is this sense in which, hang on a minute, it's almost as if they're saying E equals O. If that's the event, you know what the outcome is. And I think we do need to place ourselves very squarely and firmly in. I need to think about how I intentionally respond. So Laura's talked about setting boundaries, about things you can do to adjust your posture. And I think, you know, we need to be careful, and lots of people are taking responsibility that it's avoid victim thinking at this point, because maybe, you know, when that research was done and so many people reported this and a lack of sleep, maybe a follow-up question could also be, so what steps are you putting into place to try and help yourself and improve the situation? It's like, there is another question to ask here. It's not, isn't it terrible, this is happening to me? Certain things that happen in our lives are not inevitable. And although we can't control everything, there are things that are within our sphere of control. And I think Laura's going to like unpack that. And I think it is a question of avoiding that negative victim thinking. And also, it's not just about being positive, it's about being realistic, but being honest with ourselves, but also very much about saying, okay, how can I influence or improve this situation? And that comes down to sometimes taking responsibility.
So one of the ways that we can influence our situation is looking at our working environment. So I want to explore that for the next couple of questions. I want to make the first a quickie because I want to get around everyone and quite quickly, particularly if you haven't been working from home very much before. How have you created the right workspace for you? So Rob, let's start with you here. How have you created the right workspace for yourself at home?
So great question. So I've never had an office, so I normally have my laptop and my iPad. And actually, when I first came in, I pulled down all the offices and made everything a lot more open plan working. When I worked at home, I would work downstairs on the kitchen table, which is now the school table. So my biggest challenge is sort of finding somewhere where I can kind of close the door and as much as possible minimize my interruptions. But I put out a message to my team. So I've ordered exactly what you did, like a standing chair, so I can stand if I want. I'm sat on a Swiss ball right now. I ordered a desk. I've got an extra monitor. And I just this morning I put a note out to my entire team and I said, look, by the way, I've just upgraded my entire home office for less than it would cost for one train ticket to Kemble and back. So so what is, please go and order and invoice us and expense it, because I see my job as a leader is to create the right environment for success. So that's purpose, that's autonomy and mastery. And all the stuff we've talked about that, but I agree with all of the things that we've said, is that for me it's a marathon, not a sprint, and therefore once we've got over that kind of first bit, the mental well-being of my colleagues is paramount. There's no point in us going back and someone's got a bad neck or a bad shoulder. That's why I'm using the Calm app, that's why I'm doing my Pilates. And I'm very cognizant that I want to make sure that I have a good posture, because it's unhealthy. I'm lucky because I'm homeschooling. I am switching. I'll go down and I'll be outside. And yeah, this evening after dinner, I'll play badminton with my wife in the garden after we put the girls to bed or whatever. So trying to mix it up. But I suppose it's really encouraging my colleagues to do that. And I had an absolute fear, especially some of my youngest colleagues working on their laptop on the sofa, because that is just not, you can do that for 20 minutes or half an hour, but you cannot do that for 8-10 hours a day. That's going to be seriously bad and I'm not a health expert, but it doesn't take, you don't need to be a health expert to realize that that's not going to be good. I suppose the point is that we can order everything. So it's amazing what we can order. I was missing my whiteboard, so I just ordered a whiteboard. I didn't have any decent whiteboard pens, so I ordered some pens. So in the space of a few weeks, I've turned the spare bedroom into quite quite a decent office environment, and encourage my colleagues to do the same.
And I've done similar. My office now looks more like a TV studio, with similar adapting. Now, for the rest of you, I think you pretty much all have a home office already set up. So I think if we just go around quickly, what would be your sort of number one? What would be, if you were setting up a home office from scratch? What would be the number one thing that you would put in there? Tammy, let's start with you.
Ooh, well, I like to think of where I work as the place that I create. So the work that I do is what I kind of like create in this world. So I'm quite obsessed with art studios. So I look at Laura's backdrop with all of her ideas up around her. So the one thing for me is being able to surround yourself with something that inspires you. So I'm actually in a rented flat at the moment. I've taken the decision I'm going to paint the space behind my desk after I leave, and I've just stuck things all over it now, and all of my ideas, you know, I have a list up of what I want to achieve within this coronavirus like lockdown. I was listening to you, Andy, and inspired by what you were saying you're able to achieve in that time, and yeah, I'm getting through more of that list. So surround yourself with your ideas.
Brilliant. Tom?
Slightly different. I took a photo just now of my setup. And I've got a very small standing height desk with a proper chair that lets me go. So I can either stand at it or go high. There's a second monitor, which I adore. It makes a huge difference to me. But with a mount, and the mount's important because it means that I've got the whole of the desk. So this desk is like 75 centimeters by 75 centimeters, 2'6" by 2'6". So it's the sort of thing that fits in a corner. And I've put it right by the window, and I look out on the street where people walk by, and I find it very helpful to sit right in the window and to have people near me, and a proper keyboard and a proper mouse. So it's I've just recreated the things you'd expect to have, but in a very, very compact space.
Excellent, and another good use of virtual backgrounds as well. Laura, how about you?
I think for me, one of the things is some headphones, so that you don't get distracted. Even like for somebody like you, Tom, who's working at home, there can be distractions. So I find even if I just put my headphones in and I haven't got any music on, it helps me. But if you do want to listen to music, I would say get a happy playlist, right? Because if you listen to depressive music, you're gonna be depressed. But if you listen to music that makes you happy, even if you have a little bit of a shoulder bop, you know, while you're working, you are much more productive.
And Paul?
We can't control everything, but in terms of if I have that option of how I'm going to set up my office, and it's how mine is going back to Tom's points, the whole thing about light, natural light. Now, actually, I overlook part of my garden, and I just find it incredibly therapeutic. So I think we all need to recognise we have our own preferences. I'm fairly low tech. I'll be exactly the opposite of some of you guys in terms of what's around. But as long as I've got a space in which I can write, and I use this sophisticated technology called a pen, and I use paper as well. And I actually get someone else to type up all my notes. So if I've got pen and I've got paper, got a bit of sunshine, which we always get in the northwest of England, look out at my garden, I find that incredibly therapeutic.
Sunshine in the northwest of England. I've obviously been there the wrong times. I think as Laura talked about distractions, and one of the emails I got came from Guy Clapperton, and Guy's worked from home for 27 years, but he said he'd be interested in hearing how people cope when everyone else starts working from the same home, and at least one of the workers has a job that seriously has to take priority. So in Guy's case, his wife is involved in sourcing and administering delivery of emergency food supplies for deprived or isolating families. So obviously that trumps absolutely everything. It sort of ties in with a wider question that I had, which is how you manage distractions like kids running around, like other people working at home, for example. Rob, you've touched on this already, and you've got young kids. Tom, I know you've got young kids as well. So I thought it might be useful getting your perspective. I don't know if you can talk about how to prioritize different people's challenges, but you know, obviously, Rob, you're balancing homeschooling responsibilities, I assume, with your wife and everything else that needs to happen. How do you work out who takes priority?
So, well, look, my wife works as well. She's a psychotherapist, so she's actually busier than usual. She's, wasn't sort of pro virtual psychotherapy, but in this environment, that is the only way. And actually, the anxiety and the people who talked about this in high demand, that doesn't really work having kids coming in. So I really loved, I think it was Tammy who taught, it was Laura who talked about the acknowledge, accept, adapt. So all my colleagues are now used to my kids coming in, and we're all used to each other's kids coming in. That has become the new normal, and everyone has a laugh, a bit like changing the background. So that works. So my wife has pushed some of her stuff into the evenings. So she does stuff. So I make sure that I do the sort of evening routine, and she does that. And then when she does during the day, I have blocked off my calendar and I've just told people that I just cannot, I cannot work. And so I'm very, between us, we've run quite it's a bit like air traffic control schedule: homework, her work, my work, what's meetings that cannot be moved for me, and what's meetings that what can't run for her. We've blocked off all of her schedules in my diary, and I've blocked that off. And so tomorrow I'll take the kids out, rain or shine, because they have to be out the house so that they don't interrupt her, so she can get on with her client Zoom calls. So it really is planning, it's preparation, it's boundaries, it's all the stuff that we've talked about. And I would say my new colleagues are actually my wife and my kids, right? You've got to kind of find a way of compromise and making it all work.
And Tom, for you, working with kids around?
I think as part of this, we have to acknowledge that very different people are having very, very, very different experiences. If you've got 2 3-year-olds, that's very different if you've got 2 teenagers to having nothing. Pick up on what Laura was saying about headphones. I find headphones to me do 2 things. One's about the noise, but the other is they're quite good at symbolizing. So often people will find you using the space, and it's basically like, leave me alone. And you do the theatre of, sorry, what? You heard everything they said, but doing the theatre of not having heard them just kind of can help with that. There's a thing I'm trying to do, basically trying to actually throw myself into spending time with the kids and being all with them. So when I'm not with them, then I'm not as missed. I find it easy to kind of be in the grey zone of not with them or get any work done, which is of no use. And as we've touched on about having different zones for different activities. So if you can find a place that you go to work and a place that you go to do something else, it may be a place that somebody else uses, but for you, it's your workplace. It's not your workplace. And the last one is about figuring out and acknowledging what your distractions are. So one of my worst is arguing with people about the epidemiology of other countries and what they should be doing on Facebook. But by acknowledging that's a distraction, that it helps me to manage it.
Yes, I unpinned Facebook from my from my saved tabs when I realised what a distraction that was causing me. Couple more questions. We had another one that came in as a result of the newsletter. Oh, so Laura is waving frantically.
I want to say something.
Jump in.
I think the biggest thing when you're working from home is the C word, which we haven't talked about, and that's communication. Okay, because as Rob has said and Tom has said, you've got to communicate with people, but communicate. People are going to be stressed, but it's having a language where you come into it and you talk to that other person in a rational manner, right? Rather than, I've got this to do and I've got that to do. It's like, okay, let's communicate what needs to get done, what is important for you, what is important for you. And it's teamwork. You know, self-employed people, you know, working in corporate, it's all about teamwork, and it's no different being at home.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll be quiet
now. No, be clear. Well, you communicated very clearly to me that you wanted to say something, but setting boundaries and being really clear with each other, but in a patient way. Deep breathing before you say what's on your mind. So 2 last questions. John Stubbing sent me an email from the newsletter, and he said it was more of a discussion point, which I've developed into a question. He said, as you can imagine, it could be very easy for me to revert back to hiding away in my home office, head down and not reaching out to clients. And John, by the way, is an accountant, so someone probably very happy to just sort of lose themselves in paperwork and so forth as well. He said, but I'm doing my best to check in with people frequently. I've used video calls more in the last week than I've ever used them in my life before March. How is this going to impact the future of work? So we have touched on how, Zoom has come in, and we've talked about how long it takes to create a habit. I guess broadening the question, how much of what's happened over the last 3 or 4 weeks and may continue for another month or more is going to stick going forward, and how much are we going to revert to normal? Tammy, I'm going to come to you on this, because obviously as someone who's a real evangelist for remote working, you talked about seeing a lot of the things you talk about coming true. How much do you think of that will stick going forward?
Well, I think it's really exciting because, I've had so many health and wellbeing benefits from being able to remote work, and so that's one of the reasons I wanted to help facilitate other people do it too. And I think the skeptics that were out there before that said that it wasn't possible to work from home are having to review that, because they're having to make it possible to work from home. So we were already seeing an acceleration towards remote working, and I think that this has become a catalyst that's probably accelerated that by about 10 years. So what I would hope to see is more opportunities for remote working or flexible working, which is great for health and well-being, but also for people, parents potentially, that have childcare that they need to juggle, that need more flexible situations. But another great benefit, I think, is also that borders have kind of been moved. So there'll be more openness, I hope, towards a global talent pool. And what that will mean is more people, wherever they are, will have work opportunities or opportunities for training, which I think is a really exciting sort of future prospect that potentially could help rebalance economies and potentially even the world. Looking forward a long way. And then I think thirdly, it will be around how we actually use social connection. So I'm craving social connection too, but I think we'll consider it more for when we really need it. So we'll travel when we need it, we'll meet when we need it, we'll ring fence that time, and we'll give it our full attention, no being on emails, on our phones at the same time. I can see trends of retreats after this, getting people back together, team building, spending consolidated time. But then I hope maintaining some of the remote working habits, which is being able to ring fence yourself, get your head down and get some work done productively without all of the interruptions that come in an office.
Fantastic. So for everyone now, just to wrap up, with all of these benefits that Tammy's seen, and that hopefully a lot of people have found something positive that they can turn to, what are you doing differently now as a result of the lockdown that's worked so well for you that whatever happens going forward, when we go back to, let's say we go back to complete normality as we knew it or know it, that's going to stick for you? What are you going to keep in play that you weren't necessarily doing before? Rob, you've touched on a few possible answers for this already. So what's the number one thing that you'll make sure you'll be doing whatever when we get back to working in offices and normal life again?
I think for me, I've been a huge advocate of flexible working. My wife and I co-parent. We don't have. I like to pick up the girls from school, take them to school. She's got a career, I've got a career. Trying to make that work and trying to normalize that in a culture, because I actually think that unlocks a whole host of other things around diverse talent pools. Definitely breaks down gender biases and all the rest. For me, the bar has been raised for travel. I also care deeply about the environment, so love the fact that the kind of carbon output has been reduced. And so I imagine, if you were someone who, let's say, every week would commute to Amsterdam because you're managing a team in Amsterdam, you've been managing your team in Amsterdam every week for the last 4 weeks, and you will be for the next 3 weeks. So why not go to Amsterdam once a month to do as Tammy says, to have a proper let's get together, let's have lunch, let's have breakfast, let's spend time together, but not I'm just going to commute to Amsterdam, maybe have a few meetings and do a few emails in Amsterdam and then fly back. So for me, I'm super excited about the much sharper divide for why we're all convening. And if you haven't, I recommend a podcast by Sam Harris about 2 weeks ago called The New Future of Work with Matt Mullenweg, who's the CEO and founder of WordPress. They've been working in a distributed work framework for years. He's hired thousands of people all over the world, so the talent pool. And he talks about the different levels of distributed working as opposed to remote working. And he says, right now, we're all at level 2. But by the time we get to level 4 or 5, that's when we can have all the kind of well-being benefits. So my goal is to see, can we get to level 3 or level 4 on this kind of distributed work environment that he talks about, and benefit from the personal benefits as well as the kind of macro climate and economic ones.
Excellent. Rob, if you've got the link to that handy, if you can send that across to me, I'll put it in the notes to this on YouTube.
Yeah.
So other people can find that easily. Paul, you travel a lot, and anyone who follows you on social media will know your love affair with Premier Inn. So you talked earlier about how much of your work, like a lot of mine, is based around live events. What, assuming that we go back to that model, what one thing are you going to carry forward that might change?
I think it's actually what happens before the live events, which is the conversation I have with my client. And I think I've always been, we do a phone call. It's very rare to do Skype, and I hadn't downloaded Zoom until about just over 2.5 weeks ago. So actually, even on this call now, we could have done it in a slightly different way, not seen each other. So for me, I think one thing I'm going to do is very much use Zoom more. So when I'm connecting with the client and getting a briefing, I think there's something you get from seeing them and maybe seeing their environment and seeing their eyes, so to speak, looking at you and making that connection even greater, that previously I would have just taken some notes and listened to them over the phone. And also I've got a couple of associates who work for me. And again, I've told you when I'm traveling, I'll ring them independently. One of the things we've started to do now, we've got our own WhatsApp group, but we've also had a couple of Zoom meetings. And again, I've just found that kind of like bonds us together even more. So I think going forward, that's what I'll be doing. But I hope they don't go completely to virtual conferences, because being in the room, connecting with the audience and responding to the audience is something which I realise now is more of a privilege than I ever realised before.
Yeah, I would agree. I've done a number of virtual sessions, and they're fine as far as they go, but nothing beats actually seeing the whites of people's eyes genuinely, and having that connection that you can't replicate over Zoom. But it's a fantastic tool. Laura, what changes for you?
I think one of the big changes, we run a community of 100 people in our membership site, and we were close already. But just having things like our connection calls where, like Paul said, getting people on there, they can see everybody else, they can share what they're going through, virtual bingo, all this kind of stuff. It just brings people closer together so they don't feel like they're on their own. And that's one thing we want to carry forward, the group workouts, the connection calls, where we actually see our guys, because they're in America, they're all over the UK. So that's definitely one thing. And then personally, keep up the hours meditation in the morning, definitely.
That's a commitment I keep remaking for myself.
You should do the 30-day one. Start with that.
And that's on the platform I've got.
It is. Yeah.
Right. I use the Rock Solid platform as well, but haven't got to the meditation yet.
There you go.
Tammy, how about for you?
I think professionally, helping out startups and small businesses, I'm going to encourage a focus around longer term sort of blue sky thinking, planning. So none of us expected this at the beginning of the year, but there are some really big changes that are coming at us a lot faster than we think that could be as disruptive. So things like AI, new technologies, etc. So I think within sort of marketing planning, some new models or sections that encourage thinking around what you would do in the impossible. And then from a a personal perspective, I think one-on-one phone calls, actually, I hadn't realised how much my social activity had been around groups, and I've really benefited from my connections just calling people in smaller groups, or one-on-one. I've got more out of that experience.
I think on the blue sky thinking, I heard on the radio yesterday that Wimbledon took out pandemic specific insurance 10 years ago, and they spent £2 million on it, and they've now got a payout of 150 million, having had to cancel. So fair play to Wimbledon for that. And they were saying on the radio, not so good for the person who underwrote that and agreed to take that one on. Tom, finally, what's the big change for you?
Everything I wanted to say has already been said far more eloquently than I was going to say it. But yeah, the biggest thing for me is about those different rhythms, that when we will have more quality time, but it won't be interspersed among a zillion meetings. We'll be much crisper on either it's a quick call catch up or it's a proper meeting. But I'll throw in a bonus one of, I love the fact that the world's got more human, that we smile and wave at our neighbours, we ask people how they are and listen to the answer, and I hope that continues.
Well, definitely asking people how they are and actually engaging with the answer is so important, as you know, is important to me. I want to throw something in as well, because something that's become very clear to me this week, and I was talking on a FaceTime live with a Facebook live with Laura this morning about it, is look at our communication methods, because I've upset 2 people this week because I failed to read the nuance in text messages. And not really picked up that they've had stuff going on, and I haven't responded in the way I should. And I think that when we're not with people in person, it's easier just to fire off a quick text or messenger or WhatsApp or whatever it may be, and we lose the real meaning, what's written between the lines. And so picking up on what you were saying, Tom, is pick up the phone, even if it's for 3 minutes. Have more conversations, less chat if you can. I think that makes a big difference. Guys, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much. I hope that if you've listened through to the end, you've found it useful, you found it helpful. Give us your feedback as well. Would really appreciate that. And keep smiling, keep focusing on what you're gaining from this experience rather on what you've lost, and we'll get through this and take things forward in a positive way.